Hi, my name is Jenny Lauren Dowden for Conduit News, and today, once again, we have Dr. Patrick Wolf joining us in the studio. He is a distinguished professor of education policy at the University of Arkansas and one of our favorite school choice experts. He's here to debunk another school choice myth for us. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm glad to be here, Jenny. I feel like we're going through the Lord of the Rings trilogy, some kind of saga.
Which I love. Yes, so that makes it, that's so fun. It really is true, right? Okay, one that I think is going to be very interesting to our viewers, and I'm interested in talking with you about this because I think it's not a myth that's talked about that often. Does school choice threaten the civic health of our country? I know that Randy Weingarten has said, no, we have to have public schools. You know, that's our democracy, you know, hangs in the balance upon that. But is that true, or is that just like more fear mongering? What is it?
Well, you know, the district-run public school system was developed in our country in the 19th century, in large part to promote civic skills and civic involvement and forge young people for their responsibilities and duties as citizens.
Right.
So it is a major part of the mission of public schooling. That's one thing, but to say that only government-run public schools can shape American citizens is a much stronger claim, and it is made by many people who are opposed to school choice.
Why do they make that claim?
So their argument is that if government is running and overseeing public schools, the public schools will emphasize the public purposes of education, mainly citizen preparation. If private schools are operating, then they will just promote the private interests of children, mainly the development of their capabilities and intelligence so that they can be more effective in the market. So in their view, there's this sharp divide. If governments run, then it's for the public good. If private nonprofits are running the school, then it's just for the private benefit of participants. So that's the basis of this claim that that private and charter schools are not as effective as public schools in shaping democratic citizens.
I think that those who work in the charter school, private school sector would strongly disagree with those claims. I think that private schools we are seeing shapes the entire child and really invests and puts in them more civic duty, I think, than what we're seeing a lot of times in these district public school systems. And so how do you counterbalance that and debunk that claim for people who may believe that?
So it basically boils down to a claim of evidence, right?
Yeah.
It's which school sector is better at producing students with high levels of civic values. And so I've actually studied this question for the past 24 years.
Wow. Okay.
My very first education policy study was about the effects of private schools in New York City on the civic outcomes of students compared to district-run public schools. That was my very first study back in 1998. So recently I was invited to revisit that question and sum up the findings from all the research that's been done on private schooling and civic outcomes. And the civic outcomes we're talking about mainly fall under four buckets.
Okay.
One is political tolerance, that is allowing people with whom you disagree to have free speech rights. I mean, we're seeing with the whole Twitter files, right, that was violated, that was heavily
100%.
violated. A second is political participation, voting, voter registration, participating in rallies, those kinds of things. A third is political knowledge. We want our political participants to be knowledgeable.
Yeah.
And the fourth is voluntarism and community involvement.
Okay.
So those are kind of the four buckets. With the ideal U.S. citizen is strong in all four of those areas.
So talk to us then about that initial study that you did and then your most recent findings. Did they look different? Talk to us about that.
So the first study we did, we found that students who attended all of their education, their K-12 education in private schools in New York City, had similar civic outcomes with students who attended all public schools. Okay. But it was the students who attended private schools for a good portion, but not all of their K-12 experience had a clear advantage over public school students in terms of civic outcomes. So this was the first study I did. It was exploratory. We had about 1,000 students in it, so it was moderately sized, and it made me interested in, is this phenomenon more general? Are there other studies of private schooling and civic outcomes that we can draw from? So a couple of years ago, Corey DeAngelis and Neil McCluskey recruited me to write a chapter in this wonderful book. And of course, the book is School Choice Myths.
I love it. So, we need to pass those out, don't we?
And they asked me to write the chapter on the myth that private schooling is privatizing and undermines civic values. So I collected all of the studies that I knew of the effect of private schooling on any of those 4 civic outcomes I described. I found 34 studies. I found a total of 86 findings about the effect of private schooling on one or more of those civic outcomes. And when I counted them all up and said, was it a private schooling advantage, a tie, or a public schooling advantage, I found that 50 of the 86 findings were that private schooling delivered higher levels of civic outcomes for kids. 33 of the findings were of no advantage either way. So government-run public schools had no advantage over private schools in promoting civic outcomes. And only 3 of the 86 findings were of a public schooling advantage.
That's incredible. And I think I would not have guessed that the numbers would be that drastic. So talk to us then, what does that really look like in the public school system versus what is being taught in the private schools? What are we looking at?
So I think with public schools, the idea there is they're governed by school boards, there are school boards elections. So there is a democratic process associated with the oversight of public schools. And that gives them confidence that students who attend those schools are going to be more civically oriented just because there is an elected body overseeing them. But there's no guarantee of that. I think another part of it, of the sort of assumption that government-run public schools will outperform private schools in shaping citizens, is because there's a civics class that's required. But that's required of private schools too in our state and in most states. So private schools have to deliver civic education just as public schools do. And it's possible that they do it better than public schools do. And I think the final element is that if you want to shape free, democratic, active citizens in our country, isn't it a problem if the first thing you say to them is that you have to attend this school and only this school? You don't have a choice in the matter. You don't have the authority to choose your school. Is that really the best way to shape free, active, democratic citizens?
That's really good. That's a great argument. Can you talk just briefly about a few of those findings? What did you think, or what were, I guess, maybe some that stood out to you the most?
I think on political tolerance, the private schooling advantage is quite strong in that area. And I think it might be because political tolerance demands a lot of an individual, right? You basically have to say, okay, I really dislike the people on the other side of this argument, and it could be the abortion debate, it could be the affirmative action debate, whatever debate is really your big thing. You have to say, okay, I really disagree strongly with the people on the other side, but I'm going to defend their right to articulate their arguments, to demonstrate. It goes back to the famous maxim that was attributed to Voltaire, the French philosopher and legislator, and that is, I may disagree completely with what my opponent has to say, but I will fight to the death for his right to say it. I mean, that's what tolerance kind of demands, and I think private schools have an advantage in instilling in their students this value of you can have a strong position on an issue, but you also have to be fair to your opponent. and not just demonize them.
Right, which I think probably a lot of families would feel as though, especially these past few years, you mentioned virtues. I think families now are wanting to, and what research shows, people have said, time and time again, yes, families want to put their child in an environment where they are thriving academically, but just as equally important is they want their values to align with what is being taught at the schools. And I think a lot of families would say, you know what, it feels like my child's school right now is just trying to turn my kid out to be a, social justice activist, because a lot of parents would say they're not really giving the option of critical, to think critically, to appreciate debate and different ideas. What would you say to that, especially where we are right now?
Well, I think it's critically important, and I'm glad you raised that, because the goal, the ideal situation for a school is to instruct a child in a value system that's consistent with their family's value, but also introduce them to other value systems that are out there, and to instill in them a basic appreciation for respecting individuals for who they are and what they think. And so it's that combination, and it really does start with strong personal convictions. We shouldn't be afraid of strong personal convictions that stem from a family set of values. The key, and what I think a lot of private schools are very effective at, is getting students beyond that and adding that second component of tolerance and civility and respect for others. I'm gonna tell a story from my time at Georgetown University.
Okay.
So I was a professor at Georgetown University, and of course Georgetown is a Catholic university, a Jesuit Catholic university. And shortly after I joined the faculty there, they finished renovating a bunch of classrooms at Georgetown.
Okay.
And so they were considering, they had all these crucifixes that used to hang in the classrooms. And they decided, there was a protest by some faculty and students, to not put the crucifixes back in the classroom, because that would be intolerant, that would be disrespectful of students at Georgetown who were not Catholic. So there's this big brouhaha about crucifixes in the classroom at Georgetown University, a Catholic university.
Right, how dare you?
And it looked like the anti-crucifix people were going to win until there was a rally held that was led by the student leader of the Jewish student group, and the student leader of the Islamic student group, and the student leader of the Protestant student group. And they all said, we want the crucifixes back in the classroom, because we take our religious tradition and commitment seriously. We want Georgetown to take its religious convictions seriously. It's a Catholic university. It should behave like one.
Wow.
and that turned the tide. And
that's
the crucifixes
amazing, though, isn't
in
it?
the classroom. Yeah, and good for them.
Yeah.
Good for them for standing up for people who have the power, feel the power of their own convictions.
Right.
And that doesn't equal intolerance.
Yeah.
Having strong personal religious convictions does not equal intolerance.
Well, fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it. Anything else that you would want to mention about this topic before we let you go?
Well, I really think it's a central topic for school choice, because we are at a time of polarization in our country, political polarization, and it would be great if the next generation of citizens were more tolerant, were politically involved, and involved in ways that bring people together and advance communities together. And there is evidence to suggest that access to school choice and private schooling can help bring that about.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Look forward to having you back on again very soon.
You're welcome, Jane.